Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it is time for the Q&As. And you know what, guys, even though it didn't seem like I had many questions when I went to look, the questions this week were so good that I had to stop at 12. I just started picking questions, and when I got to 12, I'm just like, I gotta stop. There's so many good ones. In fact, I'm gonna have to split this up into two parts so this doesn't turn into like a 30 or 35 minute video, just because the questions were that good this week. And again, I apologize, I had to just stop at 12. I'm like, this is just too many. So let's go ahead and get this started. First question. I can no longer lift due to injury, can only do mild cardio and various prescribed rehabilitative exercises. How much muscle mass will I lose by cutting without weight training, and can I achieve 10 to 12% body fat without becoming skinny fat? All right, this answer is going to be two-part in nature for a couple of reasons. Number one, as far as how much muscle you're going to lose all of your muscle. You are going to go back to wherever you were the day before you started lifting weights. That is what eventually your strength and your muscle mass is going to return to if you do no resistance training of any type. That's unavoidable. Why would you keep your muscle in the long term if you're not doing any resistance training or weightlifting? So that's where you're going to go back to. So 10% body fat or 12% body fat purely from cardio, you're going to pretty much be emaciated at that point. If you're 10% body fat and do zero resistance training, think about where you were when you started. You were probably a healthy 15% body fat person. Imagine yourself 10 to 15 pounds lighter than that. That's where you're going to be. So if your average height, you're going to be about 130 pounds at 10% body fat probably. And you're not going to look like you're in shape at all. You're just going to be a really, really skinny guy. So that is where you would expect to return to. And that's not a diss. That's just giving you realistic expectations. You'll lose all your muscle eventually. It might take a year. It might take 2 years, but you will lose everything and just be a skinny guy. You won't be skinny fat at 10% body fat, but you're just going to be skinny. Now, as far as the quitting training thing goes, I don't buy that. I'm sorry, but I can't envision any injury, if it's a single injury that didn't break things all through your entire body. Okay, maybe you had a car accident and you got crushed and you have pins running through through the entire one side of your body, like a whole leg, a whole shoulder, your shoulder's damaged, your spine is damaged, you're paralyzed. You could still train your right arm and right side. So I'm not buying that at all. And if you can do light cardio, then clearly you're probably not paralyzed or anything. And the reason I don't buy that is that, again, I've seen people go through horrific injuries who can still train at least parts of their body. In fact, I spoke to a young man the other day who's really dedicated to his training, busting his ass, who's paralyzed. The guy is in a wheelchair, and I watched him roll up in his wheelchair, and he looked to be in shape to me, and he said he trains his whole upper body. He can't really do all the free weights he'd like, but he's doing machines. He's doing dumbbells. And you know what? He's doing great. He's doing fantastic. And this is someone in a wheelchair who appears to be paralyzed from the waist down. He's still training. The worst mistake I ever made in my life was quitting training when my doctors told me to quit doing so. I regret that to this day. It was the worst decision I ever made. Instead of getting a second opinion, I took my doctor's advice and I stopped training. I should have got a second opinion. You need to do the same thing. Go speak to a different doctor who can tell you other things that you can do to train around your injuries. But you need to be doing something, unless it's so bad that your arms and legs are crushed and you can't do any weight training, then that I understand. But if you have a functional limb, at least one functional limb, one arm or one leg that works, then you can absolutely be training. So no, I don't buy that. You need to get in there and do something. Otherwise, your muscle mass, your health, everything will deteriorate. So if you can do any resistance training medically, then you need to be doing it. Otherwise, you're going to suffer a lot of health effects as a result of it. All right, next question. Hey Jason, I recently started training with heavy dumbbells for 3 to 6 reps. This training exposed that my right arm is significantly stronger than my left. I noticed it on both the flat bench as well as incline, especially in bicep and tricep exercises. Any advice on how to bring the left arm up to par? Thanks. All right, great question. And usually people who notice their strength imbalances when they go to dumbbells is just a sign that you don't have a lot of training experience, and maybe other people who are spotting you or working with you don't have a lot of training experience either, because usually someone who has a right to left muscle imbalance, they'll pick it up even when you do barbell movements. Meaning if someone's watching you do a barbell movement, it will be very noticeable that you have a strength imbalance. because you'll shift. They'll see the bar tilt to one angle more than the other. It'll go down one side more than the other, or you will shift under the weight a little bit. When you see someone shift slightly under a bench press, they slide a little bit, locking it out. You need to stop them from doing that. That actually creates the muscle imbalance. And you know what? The problem is that once you get into the habit of doing that, when you go to dumbbells, if you're bad about doing those things, you will continue to do them with dumbbells. And even though you're thinking, how could I possibly unevenly load this with dumbbells because the same weight is on each side, your body English, like you can shift and slide under it a little bit, just an inch will be enough to continue to maintain the muscle imbalance that you created already. And again, it's about keeping everything even. So it doesn't matter whether you're using a dumbbell or a barbell, whatever exercises you're going to use to fix that balance, you need to focus and even video yourself and have spotters watch and make sure that you're controlled all the way up and down, in the sense that you don't ever let your body shift to the left or to the right, and that you don't allow things like your scapula to come apart. You don't allow one side of the bar or the dumbbells to dip lower than the other. And by keeping everything even on all of those movements, you can absolutely fix the imbalance. The thing you've got to watch for, though, is that if you start doing unilateral stuff, you can't always make sure that you're following the same path on each side. So sometimes that can actually exacerbate the imbalance as well, even though you would think it would be a fix, and in theory it should be a great fix. But in practice, because you can't observe that you're following the exact same bar path and evenness on each side, once you go to unilateral work, it can sometimes create a situation where you can't tell if you're fixing it or not. So the main fix is, again, making sure that you're even on all your exercises, that you're not shifting, that you're not letting one side of a bar dip lower than the other, or again, creating a bad angles or uneven angles through both the way that your body is seated or through the range of motion of either arm. So that's how you fix these imbalances. And if you do that over time, they will correct themselves. Again, it's just that shifting your body incorrectly to load one side more than the other is actually what creates the imbalance, and it will continue the imbalance if you don't fix that, even if you switch to purely dumbbells. All right, next question. In one of your previous Q&A videos, you said that substituting overhead press for the incline press is okay since I can't physically ever perform the overhead press. That being the case, should I add in something else for upper back development to get the same effects, or will the incline press work just as well? All right, great question, and I do remember your question. That's why I picked this one. I do remember answering your question sometime back. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and expound on that because I've already helped you a little bit here. If you're one of those people who, for a medical reason, can't overhead press, and you have to do the incline, are you going to lose some of the potential upper back and shoulder development, particularly the rear delts, the traps, things like that, by not doing the overhead press? Yes, absolutely. But as far as the anterior side of everything, you're not going to lose anything. Can that be corrected? Yeah, because you have to remember the overhead press, it works all of those as secondary muscles, not primary muscles. So it will take very, very little to correct that. It could be something as simple as adding in one extra set of face pulls every week could actually be enough to offset the difference. So that's what I would actually have you do, either with bands or cables. Just do an extra set of face pulls every week to make up for doing the incline press instead of the overhead press, and that should actually balance anything out that you lost. If in fact it might actually push it in the other direction. You might actually get more stimulation than you would have just by adding that in. So that's a really simple fix. Just throw in an extra set of face pulls and you should be good to go there. All right, next question. Where do you see the world records in powerlifting and lifting being in the next 20 years? Think they will get progressively stronger lifters or weaker ones? No current records will be broken, etc. All right, guys, this is extremely hypothetical, and literally no human being on earth can say with certainty what's going to happen here. So please don't hold this against me if I'm wrong 20 years from now. But really the only thing that's going to matter at this point is going to be drugs and drug testing. I think at this point we already know where the genetic pool is. The best genetics are already involved in Olympic lifting around the world, and even in powerlifting, some of the same genetics are there. You look at Eastern European and Russians who are competing, who dominate everyone else in powerlifting. It's because we already kind of have the genetic pool set. We already know everything about training that's going to make a tremendous difference on either one of these at this point. So it's going to come down to purely drugs and drug testing. It's going to be a question of, can the people who stay ahead of the drug testing stay ahead of the drug testing? Because let's be honest, all of the records in powerlifting, even drug tested powerlifting, have been set by people on drugs. All of the current records in every weight class in Olympic lifting have been set by people on drugs. Anyone who wants to dispute that, I'm going to laugh at them. I'm sorry, it's laughable to think otherwise. So it's going to be a case of, can they clean the sports up enough to where the drug testing will actually work and they can catch all the current people on drugs, in which case all the records will go down, or they'll stay the same 20 years from now. There won't be any improvements. No one will even hit the current records again. So that's one factor. Or will the people devise even stronger, better drugs that can stay ahead of testing, in which case the records are going to go up. So as to whether they increase or whether no one can hit them again, is going to depend purely upon the drugs that people have access to and how well they can test for them in the future. I think that's going to be the primary factor over everything else, because I think the genetics and the training have pretty well stabilized at this point. All right, next question. What do you think about Hbcd like those in Jerry Ward's intracell? I already know what you think, and I think the same. What's wrong with dextrose? But he tried to say the carb was cone-shaped and sucked up amino acids and carried them to the muscle cell. Where do they come up with these theories? Basically, the supplement industry, as far as the theories that they come up with to convince people of the science behind this stuff, usually they just pull it out of thin air. They literally pull it out of their ass, just like so many other crazy theories I see on YouTube and the internet these days sometimes, in the hopes that ignorant, naive kids will believe it and fall for it. And they fall for it by the millions. But yeah, they literally just make this stuff up out of nothing. Jerry probably doesn't even know what a disaccharide or a polysaccharide looks like when he's talking about carbohydrates. He probably has no idea what their chemical structure is, what they look like under a microscope, or even how to draw one, the shape. So he literally has no idea. He just made it up that, oh, it's just a conical shape because it sounded good. And I'm sure the company that makes him for him just says the same thing. They just make it up because it sounds good, it sounds convincing, and some dumbass kids are going to fall for it and buy the product based upon this weird theory that they just made up. And you see this over and over in the supplement industry, and that's why it works, because they just rope in a new group of ignorant kids each generation, and maybe those kids actually go take some science classes later and realize they're full of shit, but it doesn't matter. They bought the products for a couple of years, and there'll be a new batch of new ones that'll fall for whatever lines they come up with next. But where do they come up with them? They just make them up and hope that it sounds good enough to sell a product, and it works. And the truth is, it doesn't matter what I or anyone else says about it. It's not going to stop anytime soon. I don't think we're going to be able to stop it until basically the FDA or someone comes in and slaps them for all this false advertising and just shuts the industry down itself, which again probably isn't going to happen anytime in the near future. So they'll just continue to make up silly stuff, and it'll work. It'll keep working, and it does work, and it has worked. All right, next question. What is the best way to cut in order to minimize muscle loss? Please cover the best training protocols, cardio type, diet type, etc., etc. All right, guys, I'm not going to read the whole question because what he's asking isn't relevant to the topic. Basically, there is no best diet type or real training type as far as, unless you mean weight training. Yeah, weight training is the best way to maintain muscle mass. Lift with weights. Machines, free weights, weighted body weight exercises, weight training. That's how you train to maintain muscle mass. If you think there's a best protocol out there, it doesn't exist. That very quickly turns into arguing useless minutia, and it turns into paralysis by analysis quickly. As far as diet types, same thing. The only type of diet type that has been shown to preserve muscle mass best is high protein, making sure you get enough protein in. That's it. Every other diet type is about satiety and energy. They're not about helping preserve muscle. Protein in your diet is what does that. So the only other real factor, the real question becomes, what is the best way to maintain muscle mass while cutting? Cut slower. That's it. You need to lift weights, eat enough protein, those are the first two factors, and cut slower. If you're losing muscle mass while cutting, it's because you're cutting too fast. If you slow it down, you will maintain muscle mass better, and in some cases you might even gain a little muscle mass while losing body fat, or at the very least keep all of what you have. But if you are losing muscle while you're cutting and your goal is to keep your muscle while you're cutting, then you need to slow down. You're losing weight too quickly. It's that simple. There is no other real factor there. As long as you're weight training and getting enough protein, the only other factor that's really going to matter to you, at least for a drug-free lifter, is going to be how fast you are losing body fat. If you're losing muscle and your goal is to keep it, then you need to slow it down. If you're okay with losing a little muscle because you're like, I'll just regain it later, then by all means continue. But back to your question of how do you minimize it, you need to slow down your cut. Cut as slow as possible. Cut slow enough that you keep the muscle mass. It's that simple. All right, guys, this is the end of part 1. I'm going to hop this over to part 2 so that I can get this one uploaded and people can start listening. So I will catch you guys in part 2 with the other half of the questions.